Fresh meat.
Welcome to the best horror movie you never saw, where we shine a light on horror movies that you may have missed, haven't seen in a long time, or just plain forgot about. On this episode, we're looking at Brad Anderson's chilling Session 9, starring Peter Mullen, David Caruso, Brendan Sexton III, and Josh Lucas. Strap on your straitjacket. You wouldn't want anyone you don't know grabbing your hand. What is it about abandoned asylums that so unnerves us? Do we really believe bad vibes have been left behind? Grudges from those unfortunate souls who suffered within before dying or being transferred somewhere else? As with any spooky location, our educated minds know the unseen can't really hurt us, but we fear it anyway, because what if? Or maybe what we fear isn't a ghost at all, but something very much alive. A past resident who's stuck around the place, or a mentally unsound new tenant who doesn't appreciate trespassers.
Get off my lawn.
Maybe it's that we're scared that we'll turn into the next patient. Whatever it is, an abandoned asylum is pretty much the perfect location for a scary story. And that brings us to perhaps one of the best of its kind, Brad Anderson's Session 9. What makes Session 9 so scary? Well, we shall count the ways. But what still resonates after 20 years is its mysterious nature. Even after multiple viewings, we wonder if we know what really happens within the walls of the oppressive sanitarium. Granted, whichever explanation you decide to go with, there is no easy way out, no simple resolution to calm your nerves. Regardless of your theories, Session 9 will hold onto your attention with a death grip. It starts so simply, as the best scary stories do. A 5-man team is hired to do the near impossible, remove all the asbestos from a massive, and yes, abandoned, psychiatric hospital in a matter of 2 weeks. The urgency of the job is deeply felt by the immensely stressed out foreman, Gordon, whose desperation for the money stems from the fact he has a newborn baby at home. His loyal crew is comprised of some disparate personalities. There's Gordon's right-hand man, Phil, who's going through troubles of his own thanks to the fact that his wife recently left him. For Hank, another member of the crew, there's enough tension between these two to fill a whole wing of this asylum. There's Mike, a law school dropout, who happens to know some of the institution's dark secrets. Finally, there's Jeff, Gordon's ne'er-do-well nephew who, unfortunately for him, has nyctophobia, the fear of the dark. Hate to break it to you, Jeff, but you've picked the wrong job to join Uncle Gordon on. Session 9, gently, but creepily, eases you into the place where you'll be spending the next 100 minutes with a brief guided tour through some of its corridors and rooms. Even with daylight peeking in through the windows, there's a thoroughly ominous atmosphere around every corner. Forget the asbestos clouding your lungs. There's a genuine sense of dread lingering in those halls. It doesn't help that we eventually learned the state just about tossed all the patients out into the world on their own, leaving us, and our protagonists, with the uneasy idea that some of them could still be lurking around in there, waiting in the dark. Part of what makes Session 9 so effective, so immediately, is this small group of blue-collar characters who seem so real. When we enter a horror movie, we often expect to be led by skittish teenagers, or perhaps a happy family just waiting to get terrorized. Maybe a priest or psychic will show up to provide some helpful exposition. But these are just regular dudes, not likely to be spooked by imaginary specters. So we think, if these guys are going to get freaked out, anything is possible. Anderson does a fine job establishing their dynamics and giving us characters we easily understand and recognize. Their personal problems could be our own, and if they're not prone to being unsettled by things that go bump in the night, well, their short stay in the asylum is just about to change that. And if it's not exactly your typical horror movie, there is one horror trope that Session 9 plays into well, and that's the time-honored messing around with the old reel-to-reel player, a classic no-no. Just ask Ash. The group's most inquisitive member, Mike, decides to skip out on work with increasing regularity to listen to the sessions of Mary Hobbs, a former patient with multiple personality disorder. Mary's tapes entrance Mike and us as we're introduced to the various characters who live in her, including Billy, Princess, and Simon.
Hello, Doc.
For our money, Simon is one of the most haunting figures in modern horror, and we only hear his voice a handful of times in the film. Is Simon more than just an alternate personality, though? Did he survive even though Mary is long gone? The genius of Session 9 is that we can never be sure if the recordings of Mary are intended to influence the increasingly weird events in the asylum, or if they're just a perfect soundtrack to accompany them. Session 9 is awash in ambiguity, which not all horror fans may be fond of, but we wouldn't have it any other way when it comes to this nightmare. And the nightmare seems to swirl around Gordon, played magnificently by Scottish actor Peter Mullen. There's nothing ambiguous about Gordon's depression, his despair, his unraveling. From the very first scenes, Mullen makes Gordon's unhappiness palpable. Sure, having a child might send anyone toward the end of their rope, but in Gordon's case, that new bundle of joy is seemingly having a disturbing effect on the man's psyche. Masterfully, we only catch glimpses of Gordon's wife and baby. We hear them in snatches, like cutouts from a dream. We don't know what's going on in Gordon's home, but we know it's not good. That's having an effect on his work in the asylum. And we can assume the work in the asylum is having an effect in his home. Regardless of what you make of the film's ending, we won't spoil it here. There's no getting around the fact that Gordon is a tragic figure. And while the movie is quite scary throughout, this is ultimately a very sad movie about one man's horrific downfall. Sometimes the best films in the genre are as much about dramas as they are horror films. The cast surrounding Mullen is just right. David Caruso can often be a punchline.
They hit one of us. They hit us all.
But here he gives a fully rounded performance. Phil isn't the most likable guy in the world, but he's also not, we can suspect, a bad guy either. And like Gordon, recent events in his life have made him quite world-weary. Caruso allows Phil to be vulnerable and, at times, insecure, which isn't necessarily what we expect from a Caruso performance. Although yes, he does give the most epic line reading of "fuck you" in film history.
Fuck you.
That's the Caruso we know and love. Not so vulnerable or insecure as Hank, played by a smarmy as hell Josh Lucas. If there's any character in the film we're not rooting to make it out of the asylum with his sanity and flesh intact, it's Hank, gambling addict and wife stealer who treats the job as an inconvenience and his co-workers as subordinates. There's got to be a jerk in every crew, and Hank fits the bill to a T. Stephen Jevedon, the film's co-writer, plays the solemn, intelligent Mike, and he has the film's best monologue, an unnerving tale about satanic rituals and baby murders. Wonder if Jevedon knew he was writing himself the juiciest material. There's something compelling about the character, especially as he grows increasingly obsessed with the Mary Hobbs tapes, even going so far as to bolt out on an important search in order to listen to them. Mike's story isn't the focus of the film, but in an alternate version of Session 9, one can imagine him being the main protagonist. Then there's Jeff, the mullet-headed doofus played by Brendan Sexton III. Jeff can be considered the film's comic relief, although that might be going a bit far as humor comes sparingly in the halls of this hospital, but he's an affable doofus all the same, a wide-eyed newbie doing a job he's barely prepared for. Throw in the nyctophobia and a handful of startling incidents, and you'll find yourself feeling sorry for the poor dope. Of course, a haunted house story, if indeed that's what we have here, is only as good as its house, and Session 9 certainly has a great one. When making a movie set in an abandoned asylum, you only really want to film in an abandoned asylum, and Brad Anderson found the perfect one in the form of Danvers State Hospital in Massachusetts. The place had been empty for almost 10 years before Anderson and company started shooting there, which certainly saved money on production design. All the rooms in the movie, with some exceptions, look exactly as they were found. Cast and crew felt uneasy the entire time making the film, and were only allowed to shoot in a handful of specific locations, lest they got injured or lost. Knowing these guys were actually making their movie inside the walls of a crumbling sanitarium, and not some backlot in Los Angeles, lends Session 9 an additional level of eeriness. The hospital has since been torn down, with all the ghosts going down with it, although who knows. Brad Anderson is an interesting case. Prior to Session 9, his two feature credits were the romantic comedies Next Stop Wonderland and Happy Accidents. Not exactly what you'd expect from the director of something this vividly sinister. And while he directed a couple of noteworthy films after, like the Christian Bale vehicle The Machinist and the mystery thriller Trans-Siberian, Anderson has mostly found success in TV, working on shows like The Wire, Fringe, and The Sinner. Session 9 is, for our money, his best work thus far, and we're hopeful he's able to rediscover some of that same menacing magic in the future. His control of suspense and atmosphere is something to marvel at here. A scene where Josh Lucas sneaks around the hospital grounds at night is a good example of a scary sequence done simply and expertly. Adding to the uneasiness is the unusual score by Climax Golden Twins. Yep, their real name, which fittingly isn't a traditional score by any means. A bone-chilling assortment of ambient sound and stray piano keys, the score almost takes you right inside the head of poor Gordon, whose sanity we watch gradually fade away. And if you start hearing that lonely piano music playing in your head after this, maybe you check yourself into a hospital. It might mean Simon is just around the corner.
Hello, good.
When it's all over, Session 9 will give you a dark glimpse into the frightening and sorrowful heart of a broken person, and the way a haunted tomb of a place fully unlocks his demons. And if that sounds a bit like Stephen King's The Shining, well, that's probably no coincidence, as it was one of Anderson's inspirations for the film. Session 9 is every bit as chilling as that classic, and provides a good alternative for those who have seen the Kubrick film one too many times. Not that there are enough times to see Jack be Jack.
Here's Johnny.
For our money, Session 9 is one of the more persuasive horror movies to come out in the last 20 years. The way it works its way into your psyche is subtle and impressive. Fire up the old tape deck, grab all your personalities, and settle in for a claustrophobic horror show you won't be able to forget, because Simon won't let you. Thank you for watching our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to our JoBlo Horror Videos channel. Tell your friends who like this sort of content, and turn on the bell to receive notifications for all our latest videos. We're an independent company, and we appreciate all your support.